You are listening to Unified Through Chronic and Mental Illness with your hosts, Angie Roberts and Kimberly Murphy. Please be advised that some of the topics of this podcast can be triggering and sensitive in nature.
Society is changing. A record 5.6% of U.S. adults identify as LGBTQ, polls show, and young people are driving the numbers. Generation Z again leads the way. 72% who identify as LGBTQ say they are bisexual.
Hey Spoonies and mental health warriors, welcome back to Unified. This is Kimberly Murphy here with Angie Roberts.
Hey y'all.
And today we are celebrating Pride Month.
Yay!
We hope all you LGBTQers are out there, and also those of you who are not, we're going to give you a little education today. Hopefully you'll stick around and give us a listen because we have a lot of terms we're going to throw out at you, but I think it's something that we all should be talking about. This is a really important conversation that we need to be having right now to bridge these generations together between the older generation and Gen Z. So the first thing we definitely want to let everybody know is that we are definitely not experts on anything we're about to say. We're learning as we go. Like many people in our generation, Gen Z is so informative, and it would have been really great to have a Gen Zer come on here. But hello, if you're out there listening and we get anything wrong, please let us know so that we can correct it. Today, we definitely want to talk about gender identity, and because I think there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people confuse sexual identity with gender identity, which is where I think the generations kind of lose touch with understanding with each other.
Right.
Because, I mean, we were born, you're a girl or you're a boy. And that's the way it is. But gender identity is how we feel in relation to being male or female. It's not the same as our sexual identity, which is, you know, what we're born with in terms of our sexual parts. So again, gender identity is how we feel in relation to being male or female. And there's some types of gender identity that we're going to go through today. Not all of them, of course, because there's actually a lot. But some of the more, there is a lot, but we're going to go through some of the more common ones so that we don't overwhelm people who really maybe are hearing this for the first time. So Angie, what is the first one that we're going to tell people about today?
The first one is agender. Not having a gender or identifying with a gender, they may describe themselves as being gender neutral.
Now, see, I know there are a lot of people out there right now. This is the one that's the most confusing for most people. How do you not have a gender? And I don't really have an answer for that. I think that this is something we would love a Gen Zer to come on and tell us about. We might be lucky enough to have somebody come on our Facebook page and give us some information. I think this is the hardest one for people to wrap their heads around.
Yes, if you're gender neutral, reach out to us.
Yeah, because I mean, we can understand something, but we don't understand nothing. Like I think that's just human nature to understand something, but not understand nothing. So we would love to know more about that and how you come to the conclusion that you're agender. Then there's bigender, a person who fluctuates between male and female gender-based behaviors and identities, which that one I can understand because there's a male and there's a female. There's something that you can grasp, you know what I mean, and understand. So that one's a little more easier to grasp. How about you tell us about the next one, Angie?
Cisgender. A person whose gender identity and biological sex assigned at birth are the same. For example, they were born biologically as a male and express their gender as a male.
So that's basically most people that we're talking to right now. You identify the same, your gender identity is female and your biological sex is female. You know, it's what most of us identify as. And then there's gender expression, which is basically how somebody expresses their gender through how they dress and act and other factors measured on scales of masculinity and femininity, which is like basically social constructs. Because, you know, society's decided what masculine and feminine is in the first place. But there's also gender fluid, which is a mix of boy and girl. So this person who is gender fluid may always feel like a mix of the two. But they may feel more like a man on some days and more like a woman on other days.
I can imagine that might be confusing when you first learn that you're gender fluid, and
Yeah.
that I'm not, you can be, have mixed feelings about that, or just
Like
not
maybe you
understand how you're
feel like you're
feeling, really.
confused,
Yeah.
or like you don't
That's
really
what I
know
meant.
who you are. Yeah, that's got to be really difficult too. But luckily, this new generation, they discuss these things, and so now there's a place for someone like that to be like, oh, that's what I am. That's what's happening with me. Unlike our generation, who would have just been like, what are you talking about? Like,
Right,
you're either male or
exactly.
female, get over yourself. Then there's non-binary, which sometimes is referred to as genderqueer, a gender identity label that's often used by people who don't identify with being man or woman. Again, it's usually used as an umbrella term for many gender non-conforming or non-binary identities. So again, the not male or female, which I personally have a hard time understanding.
Same.
Yeah. And so
We'd love to understand it, though.
somebody please explain it to us. We really do want to know. You want to do the next one, Angie?
Sure. Intersex, a person born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of a female or male. For example, a person might be born appearing to be female on the outside, but having mostly male typical anatomy on the inside.
This has got to be hard too, because could you imagine like your 5-year-old always being referred to as a girl, but you have a boy?
Right. Yeah.
It's got to
would be hard.
cause, like, it would cause gender identity issues at such a young age.
I would think so.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that a lot of trans teenagers especially go through this, where they'll be out and people will refer to them as the wrong gender.
Right.
So I know how hard that actually is, to be walking around in the world and not be referred to as who you feel you are. It's hard. It's got to be hard.
That it does. It has to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's also gender variant, which is gender nonconforming, which is just somebody who either by nature or by choice doesn't choose to conform to gender-based expectations of society.
Mhm.
So for whatever reason. Then there's, okay, so this one's interesting. And I was actually surprised by this, but happy that we have it. You know how we have the titles Mr. and Mrs. and Ms. and stuff like that?
Right.
Well, there is a new one that is gender neutral, which is pronounced mix. So it's MX period. And it's the option of choice for folks who don't identify as cisgender. So mostly for non-binary people.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that because like sometimes teenagers who are going for their license or things like that, who don't fit the state's criteria of being trans. So like they'll have to put their sexual identity that they're born with, and they're walking around and everybody's, who knows them knows that they're either not a male or not a female versus whatever's being stated. It comes up a lot for them, on forms, applications, school. Mm-hmm. So I think it's good that we're starting to sort of change that.
Yeah, it'll help because I know a person who is trans that really hates the fact that they have to put their real identity on there, their real gender or whatever,
It must hurt because it's like walking around being somebody that you're not. You don't recognize yourself that way. So,
right.
So that does bring us into the whole transgender thing. A person who lives as a member of a gender other than what is expected based on sex assigned at birth. So the whole sex assigned at birth thing. So somebody says trans man and they're like, well, what am I supposed to call him? What does that mean? What's a trans boy? So a trans man is someone who was assigned a female at birth, but now identifies as a man. So you would call them a man. A trans woman is assigned a male at birth who now identifies as a woman. One of the other things that can happen, not with all transgender people, but with some, is gender dysphoria, which is distress associated with your sex. Most do experience it. However, when they transition, it can help alleviate the issue. But most trans people that I know and that I've heard about will go to counseling, and they will work out their gender dysphoria issues, and also get the counseling they obviously would need for support. So, but that is an issue that does come up quite often.
It does, and it's really hard. To be just so stressed out about it. It's sad, because then how are you going to think about school, and how are you going to think about other things that you need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it kind of puts you at a disadvantage. And like, I think most people are familiar with body dysmorphia, so it's kind of the same thing, gender dysphoria, where there's confusion and distress associated with your sex. I feel so bad. I feel so bad that any kid would have to walk around feeling that way about themselves. And it's good that we have counseling that can support them and help them grow stronger as they become adults.
The next one is Z or here, alternate pronouns that are gender neutral. Pronounced Z and here. They replace he and she and his and hers respectfully. Alternatively, some people who are not comfortable do not embrace he, she, and use the plural pronoun they, their as a gender neutral single pronoun.
And I think this is like another thing that really confuses the older generations. I know that when my teenager came to me and said, I want you to refer to me, my comfortable pronouns are Z and here. And I was like, or I think it was Z. And I was like, what are you talking about? What is Z? Or, I don't want to be referred to as she or her. And to people like us, that's just like, that's hard to wrap your head around, because you've lived your entire life referring to people in these ways. So of course they come along and they say this, and it's like, I just think because it's so new, it's hard to understand at first. Like they, their, to me, it's like, that's plural. Why would I refer to one person as they?
Right, because they're not two people.
Right, especially when they pounded it in our heads in English class.
Right, absolutely.
So, try to be easier on us elder folks, even though we're not elders, we are to you guys, because we are trying to understand. But the whole Z thing was like, I just was kind of thrown through a loop on that one. So yeah, that's different. I don't know. I would like to know who came up with that.
That would be interesting.
Where did it generate from? Where did it come from?
We might have to do a podcast on the history of these names.
That would be good, right? I think that would be really interesting. Okay, and then there's gender apathetic, when you really do not identify or care about any particular gender. You're just fine passing off as whatever, and you really don't have an opinion towards your own gender.
Right.
Which, okay. Wow. Yeah. I did not know that existed. But I mean, I guess I could see it if like you are fluid.
If you're pansexual, I can kind of see it.
Yeah.
So, right?
Well, this is more of a gender identity, but
well, I mean, but they kind of go to some things, some gender identities go with your sexual identity.
I think so.
Right?
I think they could. Yeah. I think this would be more referring though to people who are kind of gender fluid.
Gotcha.
It would make more sense to me, because like they might not care if you say, hey, you're a guy or a girl.
Right.
So I just wanted to say, because our editor gave us a little kick, back to the Z here thing. Actually, people do use their in a singular way a lot of times. For example, somebody left their umbrella in the office. Could you please let them know where they can get it? The patient should be told at the outset how much they will be required to pay. But a journalist should not be forced to reveal their sources, things like that. So Thank you, editor, for explaining that to us. That makes a lot more sense. And hopefully that makes it a little clearer for people. So now that we've covered gender identity, why don't we talk about sexuality?
That sounds like a great idea.
That should be fun for everyone.
Kim, you know you've been dying to do a sex podcast, okay? So this is right up her alley here.
Right. Okay, so the first one is romantic orientation. So who you are romantically attracted to, meaning wanting to be in a romantic relationship with, and it's completely unrelated to sexual attraction.
Then you have sexual orientation, who you are sexually attracted to, meaning who you get turned on by or who you would want to engage in sexual behaviors with. So if you can see the difference in those two, to just be romantic with someone or someone you are sexually attracted to.
And I mean, hopefully you could have both.
Right. Hopefully it's both, right?
Right. Hopefully it's both. That's what everybody hopes for. And then there's obviously heterosexual people who the attraction to a gender different from their own, commonly used to describe someone who is gender binary, female or male, attracted to the other binary gender. So that's what man and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, that kind of thing.
Right. And then we have homosexual, the attraction to a gender the same as their own, commonly used to describe someone who is gender binary, male or female, attracted to the same binary gender, sometimes referred to as gay.
And I think most people understand that as well because, we've come a long way as far as that goes. And then there's also the term lesbian to describe women who are attracted only to other women.
And then there's bisexual, when you're attracted to two or more genders. This term is generally used to describe being attracted to men and women, but can apply to being attracted to any two or more genders. Note that you do not have to be equally attracted to each gender.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion with that. And one thing I do want to say is that bisexual people get such a bad rap because some people consider them as being opportunists or being just sexual deviant or not someone that they can trust, being kind of, I want to say, slutty. And that is absolutely not true.
No, it's not.
No. And then there's pansexual, when you are attracted to all genders or do not concern gender when you're attracted towards someone. So the person matters, the gender does not.
Right. So bi-curious, people who are open to experiment with genders that are not only their own, but do not know if they are open to forming any sort of relationship.
Oh, okay. I always thought it was just people who hadn't had experience in bisexuality, but were curious about it.
Open to experiment with genders.
But they're not sure about the relationship. Okay.
Right. They're not. Yeah. Or what sort of relationship, whether that be probably romantic or sexual.
Right. Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Polysexual is when you're attracted to many genders, and questioning is people who are debating their own sexuality and gender, which I think many of the people in these categories started there.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I believe that too. There are also asexual people who have not experienced sexual attraction. Note that you can also be aromatic and do not necessarily have to be asexual and aromatic at the same time. Sometimes the term ace is used to describe asexuals.
I couldn't imagine not having any sexual attraction. That
would be really weird.
Odd. Probably not weird for them, but
oh no, I'm saying for me. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
For me, for me,
that would be weird.
It does seem weird because, to me, I always thought that was such a natural part of just being human. So,
yeah,
just a biological thing that we're all born with. So, to find out that there are people who just don't know what that is like is kind of, odd to me, at least.
Right.
Demisexual people are people who only experience sexual attraction after forming a strong emotional bond first or a romantic bond. I think that covers a lot of women. A lot of girls I know anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
that. They have that. Need that romantic bond for sure.
Yeah. I need I definitely need a mental bond
Mm-hmm.
and,
Right. The emotional bond. Yeah.
right. So a gray asexual person is when you only experience attraction rarely on a very low scale or under certain circumstances.
Okay. Peri-orientated is when your sexual and romantic orientation targets the same gender.
The next one is very orientated, when your sexual and romantic orientations do not target the same set of genders. For example, being hetero-romantic and bisexual, or being hetero-romantic, homo-romantic, and pansexual.
Which is confusing.
It is a little confusing, but
But when your sexual and romantic orientations do not target the same set of genders. I mean,
Right.
that makes sense based on what we've said already before. You can be sexually attracted to somebody and be romantically attracted to somebody who is of a different gender. So I guess that does
Right.
make sense. I don't think I've seen a lot of that, but it's good to know that that's an orientation that exists. Heteronormative is the belief that heterosexuality is the norm and that sex, gender, sexuality, and gender roles all align. Now, this one, this one is the one that is considered quote unquote normal. And yeah, these are the people that kind of struggle with what we're talking about today.
Right.
Because they believe that their way is the only way, really, that it should all align together. So hopefully today's podcast, for those of you who are listening to it and identify this way, you could at least kind of absorb, the idea that there are other types of sexuality and romantic and gender roles and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and hopefully you can understand why a little bit more.
Right.
Too.
And that's what we're hoping
Right.
for.
Or some of these terms, what they mean. Because it's been a learning experience for us too. So
absolutely.
So erasure, ignoring the existence of genders and sexualities in the middle of the spectrum.
Yeah. I think there's some people are just so black and white with things.
Right.
It's funny because those people say labels shouldn't matter and they don't like all these labels.
Right.
But at the same time, they want to label it black and white. So I think it's just a matter of like ignoring it because it's too difficult to understand.
Right.
That's my guess. Would you agree on that, or?
I would agree on. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My brain shut off, y'all. It's called fibro fog. My brain just like.
It's also a lot of information, so I don't blame you.
Right.
The next one is called Cishet, and I had to actually ask someone if I was pronouncing that correctly. But it's somebody who is both cisgender and heterosexual. This is sometimes used as an insult.
Oh, so let's not use that. Right.
The next one is polyamorous, and it's an umbrella term referring to people who are open to having consensual relationships with multiple people at the same time.
Yes. So like 3 or more people.
3 or more.
3 or more. I love this one. An ally, a supporter of the LGBT plus community that does not identify with the community.
Gotcha.
Itself.
Which allies are awesome.
Allies
we should
are
get more and more allies.
Awesome.
Yeah, that community is growing, and that's great. So here's some, now that we've talked about all that, some of the things you need to keep in mind is, number one, just because you don't understand something doesn't invalidate it. Most of the recent attacks by right-wing outlets can be summarized as this gender theory stuff doesn't fit my worldview. I totally can't wrap my head around it, so it must be wrong. Just, because you're not able to understand it doesn't mean it's wrong. I can't explain the physics of black holes. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Our family dog will never understand, internal combustion engine either. I know we're being funny, but, just because you do not understand something does not mean it does not exist. And that is valid.
You can't just sit there and be complacent and not do anything. So
Right. So number 2, it's not a fad. Gender nonconforming people have been around for millennia. There's extensive archaeological evidence that transgender and gender nonconforming people have existed. In Eastern Europe, 5,000-year-old graves were found with female skeletons buried with male warrior accoutrements. There are records of Norse women going Viking. Joan of Arc was burned for wearing men's clothing. The Kama Sutra describes a third sex, and the Bible talks of self-made eunuchs. So, there's lots of evidence. The reason we see more of it now is a combination of greater cultural awareness of such people and because of changing cultural norms, which allow transgender people to be more visible. So the most cutting edge of cultural change right now is coming in the form of gender fluid and non-binary people. This is the part that conservatives have the hardest time with, but it's actually just an extension of something a lot of people already subconsciously do.
Number 3, women in our culture have much greater room to express their gender than men do, but this bolsters the underlying point. Given the opinion, straight cisgender people will change their gender expression to fit how they want to feel about themselves in that moment. Gender fluid people simply take this day to day and moment to moment. Variance in expression we see in cisgender people and expand upon it. Thus, this is not something new, but an evolution due to increased cultural space for such expression.
Number 4, gender has components of both nature and nurture. Gender has components of both nature and nurture. Demonstrating that gender has components that are social constructs is relatively easy. The colors pink and blue are not instinctively gendered. They are just frequencies of light. Dress and skirts are not either. They are just bits of fabric. A recent meta-study at Boston University looked at the peer-reviewed evidence and concluded that gender identity has biological origins, though the exact biological mechanisms remain unknown. So this conclusion is not uncommon. It is effectively the same conclusion we have reached about sexual orientation and autism, namely that these biological origins are not fully understood. So these examples effectively contradict the notion that gender and gender identity are pure social construct as well. However, neither is it purely biological. There are components that are cultural. Both are significant, and observing transgender children helps square this circle. Transgender children often assert from a very early age what their gender is and choose cultural artifacts, using a towel to make a dress, for example, to express how they see themselves. So gender has interacting biological and social components.
Well, I'm just going to blow everybody's mind right now.
Yeah.
My son wears pink and purple. When I paint my nails, he gets one nail painted, and he has 2 dolls.
Well, that's great.
Okay. So
I love
go
it.
ahead and mom shame me. I don't care.
I know. There better not be any mom shaming over that, because that's great.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
he picked them out. That's what he wanted.
You know what?
His dolly.
If Jason Momoa, one of the most masculine actors in Hollywood, can wear a full tuxedo in pink.
Right. Oh, yeah. And look good.
That's all I'm going to say, ladies. That's all I'm going to say.
Y'all need to look that picture up.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Number 5 is cultural gender norms change over time naturally. So you remember the whole pink and blue thing is for boys and girls? That wasn't always the case. It used to be that pink was the color for baby boys. This can be seen in Disney's Lady and the Tramp, where the baby that Lady protects is clearly stated to be a boy and yet is dressed in pink. Going further back until the end of the 18th century, men adorned themselves in a way that was often more colorful and flamboyant than women. However, after the Great Male Renunciation, men's garb became drab and uniform, changing very little for 100 years. So the angst over gendered norms is less about the norms themselves. If it was about a belief that gender norms are unchanging, then why aren't conservatives upset about Lady and the Tramp? They aren't.
Mhm.
So the fact remains that gender norms are changing and conservatives are angry that they have little control over it. The change itself is a normal part of cultural evolution.
Number 6 is how you are raised does not determine the reality of your gender. One line of argument that tries to further segregate transgender people is that they are not real women or men because they do not have the exact same experiences as most cisgender people.
Hmm.
This is dangerous in a sense that it invalidates the lived experience of a threatened minority group already. You know, I'm just going to put this in there that there's lots of transgender people that commit suicide, and there's lots of transgender people that are killed because they are murdered because they are transgender. So
Yeah, that's true.
they are in a very threatened minority group.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. And there's also the argument that you're only a real woman if you have menstruated, are fertile, or have had children. Um, there are cisgender women who have never had a period, are infertile, or choose not to have children and don't have to defend the validity of their gender identity and expression. And transgender people definitely do, and it's a double-edged sword for them. They're kind of like held to a double standard, to prove the validity of their gender.
They are. They
Hmm.
really are.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to get somebody that doesn't believe in transgender stuff to actually understand it. But
Right.
they've got to think outside the box and try to be loving and compassionate.
Number 7 is transgender people do not instinctively reinforce gender stereotypes. Transgender people, by definition, go directly against societal norms for how a person should dress or act.
I was going to say that transgender is not a cross-dresser. Like, I feel like people
Right.
think that transgender and cross-dressing is the same thing.
Nope.
It is not the same thing at all.
Right.
At
Like,
all. It's just a man that likes to wear women's clothes or a woman that likes to wear manly clothes.
which is what we talked about before,
which is normal.
Gender expression.
Right.
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 If transgender people have done anything to reinforce stereotypes, it is the result of a patriarchal culture, which we have no control over, which severely punishes anyone who is seen to violate these stereotypes. So we've given everyone a lot to think about. There's a lot of confusion surrounding a lot of these terms. Hopefully we helped kind of shine some light.
We hope that you can be a little receptive to this community, a little more receptive to this community than maybe you are now.
And if anybody has been listening to this and has disagreement with something we've said or something doesn't make sense, please let us know. Reach out to us. If we don't have the answer, we'll find it. We're going to be posting things on our social media pages to kind of go into more depth on some of these subjects, on some of these labels that we're throwing at you. And hopefully that will help as well. So check our social media pages throughout the week. Angie, what is the mantra for this week?
Love who you want, be who you want, and surround yourself with people you want. Never change, for you are wonderful, beautiful, and unstoppable. No one and nothing can ever stop you from being the person you want to be. Never forget that, and remember, love is love.
Love is love.
Love is love.
We really hope that you enjoyed this week's episode, and if you did get something out of it, please like, share, follow, or subscribe. All of our social media information will be announced in just a moment. Please join us next week for a whole new episode. Until then, please remember that we are always stronger together, and thank you for listening.
Mask up, guys. Peace out.
Unified through chronic and mental illness can be found at anchor.fm/unified. There you can find all social media links as well as other ways to listen.